Today's date is Friday, October 24th, 2003. This interview is being conducted in the fireside room of Gateway Clubhouse in Rossmoor, a retirement community in Walnut Creek, California. The person being interviewed is Chester Graham. His date of birth is March 1st, 1918, and he currently lives at 2700 Tice Creek Drive, number 2, Walnut Creek, California, 94595. The interviewer is Ed Berman, a member of the Veterans History Project of Rossmoor. The camera operator is Glenn Carter, a member of the Video Club of Rossmoor. The veteran served in the Army, attained the rank of Major. His dates of service were May 1939 to March 1946, and the theater that he served in was the European Theater of Operations. Well, Chester, I'm glad that we can get together. Let me ask you, you went in 1939. How did that come about?
Actually, I went in 1940 because I had gone, after graduating at the University of California with a second lieutenant commission in the from the ROTC. I went to Yurta Law School, and in 1940, the government started drafting for 1 year, and the new second lieutenants were called up for duty from 1940 to 1941. So while I was there, during that year, I went to Fort Benning to an advanced officers course for the infantry officers, and then I went to Camp Roberts in California and saw that the end of the war, the beginning of the war was coming, and volunteered for another year, which was unnecessary because of Pearl Harbor.
Where were you living at the time?
I was living down near Paso Robles. Camp Roberts was in Paso Robles.
I see. And
during that time, I got married in September 1941. But back down at Benning, I had seen the test platoon of paratroops, and I was very interested in those people. But my wife at that time, my wife-to-be, did not like the idea of me going into the paratroops. However, I had shifted from the area of Camp Roberts to the tank destroyers at Camp Cook, which is now Vandenberg. And the paratroops came around and asked for volunteers. And with those volunteers, there was nobody that could stop your request for transfer to the paratroops. I was in a tank destroyer outfit which had a low degree of morale. The battalion exec officer, 3 company commanders, 4 first sergeants, 27 of the officers, and 120 of the enlisted men put in for transfer. That battalion never left the States.
Kind of decimated then.
Absolutely. They had an adjutant general's inspection to find out why so many people wanted to get out of that outfit.
Do you remember where you took your parachute training?
Yes, but that's a little different question. The Army activated 3 parachute regiments, separate from the 82nd and the 101st. And I was sent to the 508th Parachute Infantry, which was in Camp Blanding, Florida. That's near Jacksonville. And we got our quota of officers and enlisted men down there. And we went through 13 weeks of basic training there, and then went up to Fort Benning for our parachute training. But on this deal of the getting men, we needed roughly 2,000 enlisted men, and 400 officers. We went through, we interviewed over 1,500 officers and over 8,000 enlisted men to get our quota. There were various things of how they reacted to questions, and physically they had to be in pretty fine shape, and nobody over 5'10" and nobody over 185 pounds. That was due to the restrictions of the physical makeup of the parachute harness, because that was not designed for big men. Then we went up to Benning and went through 4 weeks of parachute training up there, which went with our using the towers, which were for training control jumps, and then free fall jumps from the towers, and a tremendous amount of physical work. And then we had went through packing parachutes, and we packed our own parachutes for the 5 jumps that we had there. And then we had 5 jumps, 4 during the day and 1 night jump. Then we were qualified as parachutists.
I'm sure those night jumps were pretty hairy.
They were interesting.
When you finished paratroop training, where did you go from there?
Our regiment was moved up to an area adjacent to Fort Bragg in North Carolina. We went through then 6 months more training up there, just advanced infantry training, and then we went on maneuvers in Tennessee for 2.5 months. And after the maneuvers, we came back to Fort Bragg, and then went up to New York to ship out to Europe.
So in New York, you joined a convoy to take you to Northern Ireland, I believe you said.
Yes, we went from the Camp Nyack, just upstate from New York.
I believe that was Camp Shanks.
Camp Shanks. And we went from there down to a ship, and I woke up in the morning and looked out. We had ships as far as you could see in any direction. There must have been 500 ships, both passenger and Navy supply ships and destroyers around there.
It was a good feeling being in the middle and not on the edge.
Oh my! We watched one of the passenger ships that was not our regiment, but it was just carrying troops. They had engine trouble and they fell out, and 2 destroyer escorts stayed around them. We understand they were not torpedoed, but we were glad we were not having any trouble like that with the Germans. We did have, leaving the United States, we had B-24s flying over us relatively constantly, and then as we got to Northern Ireland, we had RAF Coastal Guards coming over us.
Okay, and when you landed in England and then went to Northern Ireland?
No, we landed in Belfast.
Belfast, okay.
And then we went to Northern Ireland on the Atlantic coast, over near Port Stewart and Port Rush, and that area is very famous for its Bushmill whiskey.
How long were you there before D-Day?
Well, we were there from roughly January until the 15th of March. Then we moved by ship to Scotland and by train down to Nottingham, the Robin Hood country. And we were in a large camp that has 7-foot walls, which they said could not be scaled, but which people were able to get over very easily. We were there, we made 2 practice jumps while we were before we went to Europe. One of them was a very disastrous jump. We dropped at night into a wooded area, and we had, out of 600-700 people, we had 200 people in the hospital. then on the 3rd of June, we went to an airfield near there. The airfield was Saltby. And we then were issued chutes. We got our ammunition, and we're ready to jump on the 5th, but that was called off, well, on the 4th, and so we would be there on the 5th. But we did plane on the 5th, and we jumped on the morning of the 6th, about 2 o'clock in the morning.
What rank were you at this time?
I was a company commander of Headquarters Company 2nd Battalion, and I had roughly 135 men and 8 officers in the battalion, in my company.
So you landed in Normandy before the troops landed in landing craft, is that correct?
That's correct. We went over the air train went from England, crossed toward the Normandy Peninsula, and then coming in from the west side, and we crossed the beaches, ran into fog, broke up our formation, and 6.5 minutes after we crossed the beaches, the green light was turned on for us to jump. I was in a plane that very fortunately dropped everybody approximately on target. Before we left, an hour and a half before we left, we dropped Pathfinders into Normandy. Each battalion dropped a plane load of Pathfinders, which went in with radar and lights that they were supposed to put up so that the pilots of the plane could drop onto the particular area. Most of those were not dropped on the right area, and so planes were dropping people 20 miles away, 5 miles away. The formation, as we got over the field, over the dropping area, was like an air circus, planes passing over and underneath us, some on fire. We got a lot of flak, but we went, when the red light, the green light went out, we went out. We were supposed to go out at 500 feet. The plane then had slowed down from 150 miles to 110 miles an hour. I was the last one out, so when I went out, the plane was probably going 95 miles an hour, almost stalling, and I went out between 250 and 300 feet. I was glad to get down.
I understand you had an interesting experience when you landed.
Well, yes, we had been given crickets. I meant to bring a cricket, but there was one person about 100 yards from me. I could see him in the dark, and I didn't know whether he was German or not, so I paid no attention, tried to pay no attention to him, and he didn't bother me. There were about a quarter of a mile away from me, there was a German anti-aircraft gun firing at the planes that were going on there. I could hear the Germans there talking, smell the cigar smoke, and they were a little bit north of me. I went south.
How long were you on the Normandy Peninsula?
Well, before we were in combat from the 6th of June till about the 10th of July. And we fought several different places, and we got no reinforcements, no nothing. However, where we were when on D-Day, right after that, in the morning, I had picked up about 20 men, and we went up to a little village called Port Philolet, and at that place I ran across a young boy who came out, probably 10 years old, and he said, "Bonjour, monsieur, comment allez-vous?" As if he'd seen American soldiers painted up and wore rifles and all of that. And I said, "Bonjour, jeune-fille. Ici, on my map," and he pointed out. I knew exactly where I was then, and I went up to our assembly point from there. And years later, a friend of mine in that area said, "Chet, I have found him." And I said, "Who?" He said, "The EC boy." So 50 years later, I went to meet a man that I had seen 50 years before. And he and I, a Frenchman, said, "William, on embarquement, American parachute officer, les cartes ici, oui, ici." And so he knew who I was, and we burst into tears.
You left out something about when you jumped, about landing.
Oh, I landed in an apple tree, and the apple trees there the trunks are not very large. But 30 years later, I went back and found my exact apple tree, and I was with a Frenchman who owns that apple orchard. And in 1990, there was a big storm, and he sent me a present. This is the present. It is a cutout of the tree, Chet Graham, your tree, and 1944, and Chet Graham, Port Philalet. That is the trunk of the apple tree that I landed in.
It's an interesting little vignette. Were you able to stay in touch? Well, from Normandy, where did you go from there?
Well, I'm going back on Normandy because on the 3rd of July we made an attack, and my battalion commander got hit, and they sent another colonel down, and that night he got hit. So the attack on the 4th of July, I was the battalion commander. And we had to attack going across open field, which was very, very dangerous. We lost a lot of men there. And we got to this hill, and I had already committed one company on the west side, and I got over there and looked at it after they'd gone out into this open field on the side of the hill. And I called Lieutenant Paulette, and I said, "This isn't working out. We have some reinforcement behind us on our right. You pull out and go back onto the left, because the 1st Battalion is supposed to be on our left, and they are an hour and a half late, and we have an open flank over there." I called my regimental commander and told him what I was doing, and he said, "You put those men back on there. I want those people back on that flank." And I said, "We're covered on that right flank because the 3rd Battalion of the 505 Parachute Infantry is there and can take care of it." And he said, "You get those men back there." And I said, "Colonel, you don't know what's going on. You have to come down here and look. You stay back there in the CP and hear these radio, and you don't know what's going on. This is very dangerous." He said, "You put them back and you're relieved." So I was relieved right then. And the next person that came down put the company back on the left side as I had requested, and we had taken the hill during the day. And that hill was interesting because some people said there are a lot of Japanese up here. But it turned out that the hill was fortified, was armed by, half of them were Mongolians that had been impressed from prisoner of war camps that were Russian prisoners, and they were in German uniforms and fighting there, and we all thought they were Japanese, but they were Mongolians. Then to answer your question, after we left that area, we went back toward the beaches, and then from the beaches we went on LSTs to Portsmouth, and by Portsmouth by train back to Nottingham, where we were based.
You had said something at this point, you got in a lot of replacements.
Well,
and you had told me what the casualty rate was for your
when we got
outfit.
to the train station in Nottingham, we were met by the town band and a lot of people, with friends of ours there, And they came over and said, well, where are the rest of them? He said, this is all that's left. When we went into back to Nottingham, my battalion, instead of 640 men, had 210, and instead of 44 officers, we had 6. We had some of the tents that were empty. We had some with, one friend of mine had a battalion, had a platoon. He had himself, his first sergeant, and one other person, and that was all left in his platoon. So then after that, we got replacements, and the replacements were good men, but we had to train them for 6 weeks to get the teamwork that we'd had in a year and a half. A year and a half, we had a tremendous teamwork, and we had tremendous people. They were not quite the caliber of the people that we'd had before, but they were good men and all volunteers. The whole parachute unit was volunteers.
After you finished replacement and retraining, where did you go from there?
From there, we went to the Netherlands for the parachute jump in the Nijmegen area, which is very close to Germany. Matter of fact, part of our troops were dropped in Germany at Kleve, and we were there for about 9 weeks. And at that time, the British were dropped at Arnhem, which was 7 or 8 miles away. And due to a problem with radios, we were unable to get in contact with them by radio. But we had a Dutch resistance man dropped with us, and he went to the telephone company in Nijmegen, and he went into Arnhem and the telephone company there, and were able to talk to the British all over by telephone, but not by radio. And the British out on their drop zone were unable to talk to the American airplanes that were flying resupply mission because they were not on the same frequency, and tons of American airborne equipment were dropped to the British airborne into the German hands. So we were up there for that period of time. Then we came back to a place.
Was there much combat where you were in the Netherlands?
Tremendous amount of combat. It was, the Germans, they threw everything they could because we were in Germany. And the nights would light up with fireworks. There were a tremendous amount of anti-aircraft fire. It was the best 4th of July service you ever saw.
How long were you in the Netherlands?
About 9 weeks, just a little over that, and then we came back to a place north of Reims, which was an old French artillery camp. We were there for two months roughly before the bulge broke.
And I understand your outfit was in the Battle of the Bulge.
Yes, we were 7 o'clock one night. We were alerted. I happened to be at the movies that night, and they told everybody to go back to their quarters, and they would get issued orders. After I was not with the battalion, I was regiment liaison officer, which meant I was with the division a great deal. And that night I was told to come up to division, and I went up to by jeep with 4 other staff officers and some MPs, and we went to Bastogne. We were supposed, 82nd was supposed to go to Bastogne, which we were the first people on the road. We didn't have enough trucks, so our transportation officer went over to the Corps headquarters and told them we needed trucks to go up to Bastogne, and they said, "You haven't any orders like that?" And the officer in charge was a very smart man. He had MPs with him, and he said, "We're taking them." And we had drivers, and we took the trucks, and we were on the road at 6 o'clock the next morning. General Gavin, who was our division commander, was very smart in one thing. He left with each battalion had their combat load of emergency rations and ammunition, so that in the morning when we left, we had that equipment. The 101st had to draw those rations and the ammunition separately, and that delayed them some 4 or 5 hours. When I was up at Bastogne, I was the representative of the G3 section, and
Excuse me, you say G3. There are a lot of people who won't know what that means.
the G3 are the operations officers who decides where troops are going to be placed. So I went with that officer of the Corps, and we looked at the highways coming into Bastogne that the Germans would be using. There were 3 of them, and we decided where the regiments should be as they came in. And while we were there, General Gavin had gone to the 1st Army headquarters at Spa, which was about 50 miles north of us. And he called and he said, the 82nd is on the road first. We have more trouble in the northern area, and divert the 82nd to come up to the area around Spa. And I will be there, and I will give the orders there. So I went down and met the Army serials, the serials of the regiments coming up, with maps showing them where they were going to go. I had sent ahead MPs at the road junctions, direct them up to where they were supposed to be. And then when the last serial came up, the 101st was following, and we told them that they were going to Bastogne. But the last serial of the 82nd crossed through a town in the east, and the German tanks were in there 20 minutes after they left. It was a sticky do there. It was not a very nice situation. The Germans had a task force under Colonel Piper, who was going around the northern end of the Americans. He was the one responsible for the murder at Malmedy. And he had gone around the north end. We needed to stop him up there. If he got to head in there, he would have gone to Brussels and taken Brussels. So there we were, and we were up in the north end. The Bastogne people of the 101st got surrounded. I'm glad we weren't there.
You had told me something about the weather while you were in this part of the Battle of the Bulge.
The weather for 2 days was very nice and very wet and muddy. Then it froze. And for 15 days up there, the weather didn't get above 15. It was bloody cold. And most of the men did not have overcoats. They didn't have the correct shoes for that weather. They didn't have gloves, which we got later on. But a lot of people got frozen feet and frozen hands because of being in that area.
I'm going to jump ahead a second. You had told me that afterwards you ran into some supply officer.
Well, after we came from Holland, we had been in very muddy weather up there, and most of the boots were rotted. So we sent out boots and called for replacement boots. Most of us had 2 pair of boots, but a lot of those had been ruined. However, I went up to the Red Cross Officers Club in Paris in May 1945, and I ran across an officer up there that I'd known at the University of California. And I said, "How come you got parachute boots?" And he said, "Oh, I'm in charge of the officers' PX up here in Paris, and I diverted 2 freight car loads of jump boots that were going to the 82nd to the officers' PX in here, and so all of us have jump boots." And I said, "You son of a bitch, I got friends of mine with frozen feet and no toes because you didn't send us the boots." I was very annoyed. I did not hit him, but I felt like it.
Okay, now we can go back to when you finished in the Battle of the Bulge, did you see Patton's troops come through on the relief?
No, we were in the First Army. Patton was in the Third Army. Patton was immediately south of us. He had MPs that if you hadn't shaved that day, you would be fined $10. If you didn't have a necktie on, you would be fined. If you rode with your windshield on your Jeep up, you would be fined. And we looked like a bunch of ragamuffins. We had every kind of a thing that we could wear on to keep us warm. We had sheets that were delivered to us by some of the Belgian people, we used those. We had every bit of equipment we could get to keep warm. But no, we didn't see Patton at all, though I did see Patton in Normandy. But we did know of him being over there, and he was the one that relieved Bastogne. After we left that area, we went back to the area near Reims where we had been, and then we got new troops again, and then we were diverted from the 82nd. I'll go back a second. We were supposed, orders had been issued to us to go to China for the invasion of Japan. And through General Gavin, we got orders instead of that we were going to go to SHAEF headquarters, be the guard around General Eisenhower's headquarters. But before we were doing that, we were diverted to airfields around Chartres and Dreux and Yverdon, all places where the C-47s were stationed, and they were flying gasoline and food into Patton and bringing back wounded. We were supposed to drop in on prisoner of war camps, and we had a schedule of where the time factors, and we knew where the prisoner of war camps were. We were supposed, if there was trouble, go in there. We would know by noon if we were going to be used by then, and if we weren't then we would schedule on the map where the prisoner of war camps were for 2 days out. Then we went up to, after the war was over, which came over in May while we were there, then we went up to Frankfurt and spent our time up at Frankfurt. We had one battalion guarding the generals out where they lived. There were 250 of them, which took a lot of people to guard them. And then we had one pulling guard duty and meeting dignitaries, and we had one battalion meeting around SHAEF headquarters, doing the guarding there and having a formal guard mount every night. From there, we started to get orders of people to go home.
That made you feel pretty good.
Feel very good.
While you were overseas, how did you stay in touch with your family?
V-mail was extremely good. They had photostats of the letter. We'd get those, and the photostats would go home to my wife. And while I was in the Netherlands, I got a letter 4 days after my daughter was born.
So mail was pretty good?
Mail was excellent.
Okay. What was the food like?
The food in combat were normally canned rations, C rations and K rations, and those actually were good, but you got tired of the same thing a lot. But I must say, in combat, our people taking care of us, the cooks, did one tremendous job. We normally got a hot meal every day, including Thanksgiving and including Christmas. We'd get, but when we were up in the Bulge, we requisitioned houses from the Belgian people, and we would get 20% of the men off the line and back into houses for 6 hours where they could sleep and get hot food and be warm. So, and we rotated those people through there. And the cooks always made sure there were hot meals there.
Did you have plenty of supplies?
Plenty of supplies in the Bulge. We had plenty of supplies. In the Netherlands, we were at the initial part. We had what we carried in with us by equipment bundles, and on the person, we were down to a few rounds of mortar ammunition and rifle ammunition until they broke through with the supply trucks. But that was 10 days. 10 days we were on short rations, and the British had broken through, and we were using British rations, which were just terrible, except that they issued a rum ration every day, which was nice. But in Normandy, when we first were there, my battalion was trapped on a hill. We controlled a road network and a bridge, and we were up there for 5 days without any resupply of men or water or ammunition or food. It was not a very good situation there. And the French people were just tremendous on getting water to us and getting milk to us and sharing the rations that they had. Anything they had, they would bring up and take care of us. And the same way with the Dutch people. They were tremendous. And the Belgians the same way. The Belgians had trouble because the Germans had used that area for a period of time. And when they retreated back from France, they came right through that area, and they were pelted by the Belgian civilians, who were not very hospitable. And then as we pulled back in there, the Germans came in there, and they shot a lot of people that they did not like. They took, in one small town there, they took 30 of the men and boys, put them in a church, nailed the church shut, put the thing on fire and machine gun. There were none left alive. The SS troops were not very nice people.
The atrocities of war.
The atrocities were, we didn't take a SS soldier captive. If he surrendered, he didn't live.
Did you do any traveling? Did you get any R&R while you were in service overseas?
Well, after the war was over, we couldn't get much R&R, but I was fortunate in being able to go to a military government school in Paris, which was a 2-week course, and it was not a difficult course because their hours were from 9:30 to 11:30. My wife afterwards, did I see Paris? And I saw Paris. And after we went back to the area in Frankfurt, we had a rest center on Lake Geneva on the French side, Hotel Royal, which is owned by the Evian water people. And I was fortunate that I knew the regimental commander who put me down there as a commander of that rest center for 2 weeks, which was 2 months, which was a very nice duty. And as we rotated men in there for 2 weeks at a time, they had given an orientation lecture with what they could do and what they couldn't do. They could bring any guest that they wanted to the hotel. There was no uniform regulations. Stay out of Switzerland and be here when the trucks go home, and stay out of jail. Those are the only things that they had to worry about. We had men going to Italy and seeing their families and getting married. We had people going back to Northern Ireland, and we had people going back to England and getting married. And they all came back, and we had nobody not on time.
What did you think of your fellow officers and the soldiers, the quality of them?
I have never had a fraternity such as I have with the airborne people. The paratroops, the men, the officers, we ate the same food, we wore the same, we're all brothers. And I had, as I was telling you the day you came by, I had 5 phone calls from people that I knew in the service. We are an extremely close organization. We know each other by name, rank, serial number. The rank has nothing to do with anything. We were just a brotherhood of people.
You've maintained your contacts with many of your fellow veterans, apparently.
Well, our regiment has had a reunion every year, and I've been to 30 of them. And my company has had a reunion every year until the last few, when, because of health of the man, health of his wife, money, sickness, we haven't had those. We now will start having reunions again with other companies, because our regimental reunion after this year, this coming year, will be our 60th of the regiment, and we will have no more regimental reunions. Well, the last reunion we had 400 people there, 160 were veterans, and the rest were family. But like, as it's staying like in Normandy, we get out of there and we have tremendous casualties. We had an awful lot of people come through, which are very fine people.
When you got out of the service, what did you do?
Well, I decided I wouldn't go back to law school because I didn't like, I had been outside for 6 years basically, and I wanted to do something as selling, so I worked for DuPont for a period of time. And while I was with DuPont, through friends of mine that were manufacturers agent, they helped me get represented various factories, and my wife and I had our business. It was our business, not mine. She did the inside, I did the outside, and we had a very successful business for 35 years. Then I sold the business, or we sold our business to a friend of mine, and after that we were no more in business.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
Yes, very much so. And I must say, our business would not have been as it was without what the Army had taught me. If you have a job to do, you do it and then play. If you're in the morning, as today, I get out of bed and have the coffee, which was set up last night. I then get up and make my bed and take my shower. Those are most deals of you orderly and neat, and you take care of things as they have to be done. If you don't, things fall apart.
Well, Chet, there's been quite a story. Is there anything you'd like to add that we've not covered in this interview?
Well, I have a very nice son, and I have a very nice daughter, and I have 2 grandchildren, girls, and 1 grandson, and I have 7 great-grandchildren, which is a very nice operation.
Yes, that's quite a cap to a marvelous life.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
I have nothing that I would go back on. I've had a very happy life.
Good. Well, thank you, Chet.
Well, thank you, Ed.
Very glad you were able to participate in the Veterans History Project, and your story is very fascinating. Thank you again.
Thank you.